Hey, it's Keith with Yarbrough & Sons, and I just wanted to take a minute to show you the most common problems we have on units and ways that you could take care of them yourself. First thing we're going to look at is actually replacing what we call a capacitor. Most units have a capacitor in them. There are some higher efficiency units that don't have capacitors in them. Some of them have two capacitors. We're going to look at is actually diagnosing that capacitor and then replacing it. First thing, before working on any unit, you want to make sure you don't have power to that unit. If there's power to the unit, you run all kinds of risks of any kind of injury. So it's always good to pull that power out. On most units on the outside here, it's just a simple disconnect, or on an inside unit, you can actually turn off the breaker or unplug the furnace. Reasons you would want to replace the capacitor is because it's weak or not working at all. A common thing to find on a capacitor is actually it blows up because it's got too much heat in it. That's one reason. Whenever you're going to see them fail, what you're going to find actually on the unit is there's a possibility your fan cannot run or your compressor cannot run. Definitely those are signs that that capacitor could be bad, but it's also a sign that other things could be going wrong. If you know your fan's bad, can actually cause that capacitor to go out. So it's definitely something that is an easy fix for homeowners, but just because you replace the capacitor doesn't mean that's the only thing that you would find on that unit. And that's why we highly recommend that you have a professional diagnose your whole system. That way there's no other issues with that unit. Removing the door is pretty simple. It's just a couple 1/4 inch screws, and then we will be into the electrical compartment. We're actually going to be looking at this capacitor right here, and we're going to go ahead and check it. One way you can check it is you can pull these wires off, take a multimeter that has a capacitance checker, and just check microfarads on it. What I'm doing right now is I'm just removing these wires, and I actually have my meter set to capacitance. There's usually a deal like that. Some of them you have to actually switch over your meter, so definitely read your instructions on your meter to figure out what you need to read microfarads. And so with that, I just simply go from my C terminal. There's a marking on here of C, and then there's a marking on here of fan, and I want to go to there and I want to first check that, and we're at 5. If we actually look here on the capacitor, you can see that we're supposed to be at 35.5. That 5 is going to be our fan, the 35 is going to be our Herm. So that 5 is in ratings, and on every capacitor they tell you if it's plus or minus whatever percentage that it's rated for on that capacitor. So we're right where we want to be on that one. And so to check the Herm, we want to go from C to where it says Herm on the capacitor, and it is 34.5, and we want to be within 5% of that. So 10% would be 3.5, so we're within range of that. One thing I'd like to say is taking these wires off, we need to make sure that they go back the way they were. Helpful hint is to use your phone and take a picture, or you can always take a pen or a marker and you can mark C on there and then take a picture, and that way you can see it better. But you want to make sure you match up what it's supposed to be on that capacitor. And then we can just put the wires back on, and this one's good to go. But we'll go now and we'll show you how to actually replace that capacitor. So I went and made sure right here that we're having the right size of capacitor, so we're not replacing it with anything that's out of its range. We want to make sure that we get an exact replacement for what it is. Now the big thing is a lot of these will have a VAC on them of 440 volts or 370 volts. Simply just take your capacitor out, and like I said before, here are those markings. If you can see it, there's a C there, there's a Herm, and there's a fan. So we want to make sure we get all those back to the way we had them before. And a good way, if you did not take a picture, check the wiring diagram on your actual unit. Usually will give you a hint on which one goes to what. First thing we want to do is just take this screw loose and take that capacitor out. And simply put the new capacitor in its spot. And then we just want to match our colors up to where they go. So this was actually my fan, so I want to go to my fan. Another helpful hint is usually manufacturers, this isn't always true, but manufacturers will put their fan, they will only have 2 lugs to be able to connect to. So that's a quick reference of where that one goes. So that goes right there. And then usually your Herm will only have 3 lugs. So we know that my Herm goes right there. And then your C wire will actually go to this 4 lug terminal. So that's a nice way to not even have to look at it, but I always do say, make sure you're getting them connected right. So on firing off, we want to make sure we plug back in our power, so we have power going to the unit. So simply just plug back in your disconnect. Most of these do have where they're off and on, so that you can store it in there when you have it off. So just make sure we're putting it on the on. There's usually a marking somewhere just to say that it's on. So we plug that in. At this point, we want to go ahead and make sure we turn on cooling and go check to make sure everything's working right. All right, system's on and everything's running, fan's running. You can always check to make sure the compressor's running by simply filling your line sets. Make sure that that larger line set, which we call the suction line, is actually cool, and then the liquid line, which is the smaller line set, should be, depending on the temperature outside, should be somewhere, you know, kind of warm to it might not be too warm to your touch, but definitely make sure that suction is a cool line, and that's a good indication that that compressor is running.